Before you left the house this morning, you looked in a mirror, maybe just for a second. Maybe you opened your phone camera, adjusted the angle of your face, checked if your hair looked right. You know exactly what your face looks like, every line, every angle. But stop for a moment. A flat, accurate mirror, as common as the one you use today, only appeared in a tiny fraction of human history. So hundreds of thousands of years ago, when your ancestors also had a face, did they know what it looked like? The answer is stranger than you think. You might immediately think of water. A still pond, a moment of leaning forward, and a reflection appears. That's true, but it's not as simple as you imagine. Natural water almost never stays perfectly still. A light breeze, a small ripple, a shift in the light. All of it distorts the image, blurring it, making it clear one moment and gone the next. It gives you a hint of a face, not a faithful copy. And more importantly, not every place your ancestors lived had calm, clean, well-lit water available. For most of your ancestors, seeing a reflection in water was a rare occurrence, not a daily habit. So what about man-made tools? This is where the story really takes a turn. The earliest archaeological evidence of an object specifically crafted to reflect a human face only appears about 8,000 years ago at an ancient settlement called Çatalhöyük in what is now Turkey. There, archaeologists found fragments of obsidian, a naturally occurring volcanic glass, polished so smooth that its surface reflected light almost like a crude mirror. If you laid the entire history of humanity out on a line roughly 300,000 years long, that first obsidian mirror would appear right at the very end, less than 3% of the way along. In other words, for most of the time humans have existed, there was no tool at all that let a person see their own face accurately. What's worth noting is that those obsidian mirrors were neither cheap nor easy to make. The right type of obsidian had to be found, with the right purity, then ground by hand for hours to achieve the flatness and polish needed. They were likely not common household items, but rare objects, possibly ceremonial in nature or belonging to a small number of individuals with special status in the community. That means even after the first face-viewing technology was invented, the vast majority of people alive at that time probably never once got the chance to hold one and see their own true face. Take a moment to picture that. You know your own hands. You know your own feet. You can see them directly at any time. But your face, the most distinctive part, the part others use to recognize you in a crowd, is the one part of your body you can almost never observe yourself. It's a strange paradox of the human body, and for hundreds of thousands of years, that paradox had no solution. So how did your ancestors build an image of their own face? The answer doesn't lie in a reflective object. It lies in the people around them. The sociologist Charles Horton Cooley, at the start of the 20th century, introduced a concept called the looking glass self. The core idea is simple but profound. People don't see themselves through a physical reflective surface, but through the reactions of others, an admiring glance, a smile, a disapproving frown. Each of these expressions, repeated across countless interactions, gradually assembles into what you think of as your own image. For your ancestors, this wasn't a metaphor. It was essentially the only method available. They learned to understand their own face not by looking at it, but by watching how others looked at them. This might sound abstract, but there's remarkable real-world evidence showing just how accurate it is. The anthropologist Edmund Carpenter, while working with isolated communities that had never encountered a modern mirror, documented the moments when some adults saw a clear reflection of themselves for the very first time. The most common reaction wasn't delight. It was panic, confusion, even denial that the image was really them. Some people covered their faces. Some laughed nervously as if they had just seen a stranger wearing their own skin. This wasn't the reaction of someone naive about new technology. It was the entirely rational reaction of a brain that had never, in its entire life, had to confront its ability to recognize yourself in a mirror is obvious, something built into the brain from the start. But the psychologist Gordon Gallup, who developed the famous mirror self-recognition test in the early 1970s, showed the opposite. In his experiment, a harmless colored mark was placed on an animal's forehead while it slept, completely unaware. Then, when the animal looked in a mirror, researchers observed whether it touched its own forehead exactly where the mark was or not. Only a small number of species passed this test: humans, some great apes, whales, dolphins, elephants, and one species of magpie. Most other animals, when shown a mirror, reacted as if they were seeing another individual entirely, not themselves. This proves that recognizing your own face in a reflection is not an automatic instinct. It's a cognitive leap, an ability that has to be activated. And for modern humans, that ability is mostly activated and reinforced through frequent exposure to mirrors from a very young age. So what happens to a child born at a time when no mirrors existed at all? There's no evidence that such a child's brain would be any less developed. But the way it builds the concept of my own face would almost certainly follow an entirely different path. Instead of a fixed, clear image that can be checked at any moment, that child grows up with a portrait pieced together from thousands of scattered fragments of feedback. The way its mother looked at it when it smiled, the way other children flinched away when it got angry, the way elders in the tribe nodded approvingly when it did something right. For your ancestors, a face wasn't an object to observe. It was a story, retold every day through the eyes of the whole community around them. What's interesting is that this very social mechanism may be the evolutionary foundation for one of the most distinctive traits of the human species, an extremely refined ability to read and respond to other people's facial expressions. If you can't check your own face, then your most important survival tool becomes the ability to accurately read other people's faces, to infer, somehow, how you're being perceived. The human brain developed specialized regions extremely sensitive to faces, not to admire itself, but to decode others. The absence of mirrors for hundreds of thousands of years, rather than being a limitation, may have been exactly the evolutionary pressure that forged the subtle social reading ability you still use every day, often unconsciously, the moment you walk into a room full of strangers. This ability leaves a clear trace in the way your brain operates today. There's a small region on the underside of the temporal lobe, sometimes called the face recognition area, that fires unusually strongly whenever you see a human face, far more strongly than when you look at any other object of comparable visual complexity. What's remarkable is that this brain region is almost inactive when you look at your own face in a mirror compared to when you're looking at someone else's face right in front of you. In other words, the most sophisticated face recognition machinery in your brain, the very system your ancestors had to rely on completely to understand themselves, has always been trained to look outward, not inward. When the first polished metal mirrors appeared in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia about 5,000 years ago, they were still dim, distorted, expensive, and reserved for people of status. Silvered glass mirrors, the kind close to what you use today, only became widely available in the last few hundred years. That means even your much more recent ancestors, people who could write, who built pyramids, who established laws, most of them still lived their entire lives without ever once seeing their own true face clearly. Now come back to yourself. Tonight, when you stand in front of a mirror again, checking your face before heading out, or scrolling through a dozen selfies to pick the one you like best, you're doing something your ancestors had almost no concept of. But here's something strange worth thinking about. Even today, in an age flooded with mirrors and cameras, most of the feeling you have about your own appearance still doesn't come entirely from that flat piece of glass. It's still powerfully shaped by how other people react to you, the likes, the comments, the look on someone's face when you walk into a room. The technology has changed, but the mechanism of building a self-image through other people's eyes, the one your ancestors had no choice but to rely on completely, is still quietly running inside you every single day, even when you think you're seeing yourself most objectively through the mirror hanging on your wall.